Theories of social identity and social learning. We're going to use an adapted version of the case, lighting a fire. Lenora just started her new job at the Department of Disability and Rehabilitation. Before she was offered the job, Lenora had to complete a number of personality and aptitude tests, so the organization was sure she was a good fit for their culture. On Lenora's first day, she reflected starting at her previous job. She remembered learning about the environment and culture of the workplace by observing and following others. When she followed her superior's actions in her old job, she learned what to do and what not to do very quickly, and it shaped her work habits. Lenora realized she was unfamiliar with this new workplace environment, as she had not had the chance to observe the organization's culture. Sure enough, throughout her first day, Lenora struggled to fit in with the workplace despite passing her aptitude and personality tests. She didn't know what was acceptable and what was expected outside of her basic job functions. Lenora felt really aware and conscious of the fact that she didn't fit in. All Lenora's co-workers seemed to be well integrated and familiar with each other. Despite this, she wanted to make a good impression, so she made sure to put on a brave face and try to follow the pattern. Lenora didn't want the other people in the office to know that she felt self-conscious, so she made sure on the surface no one could tell what was wrong. At the end of Lenora's first day, she was exhausted. She was surprised that despite all the prior testing, she struggled to fit in still. Lenora wondered if there was some way she could have ensured her first day was a bit better. Keep Lenora in mind in the following theories. Social learning theory represents an individual's knowledge and experiences, their behavior and how they interact in a surrounding environment. In this theory, individuals go through a 4-step pattern. Firstly, the individual will notice something in the environment. For the second step, they'll remember what was noticed. Thirdly, the individual will produce behavior as a result of what they remember. Lastly, the environment will then deliver a consequence, either positive or negative, that will change the probability of the behavior appearing again. Let's relate this back to Lenora. Lenora displays the first step when she notices that she doesn't fit in her new work environment. She's then constantly aware and self-conscious of this, therefore displaying the second step. This then leads to the next step. Because of this, she produces a behavior by putting on a brave face and tries to fit into the environment. At the end of the day, Lenora realized how exhausted she felt and wonders if there was any way she could fit in without doing that every day. This demonstrates the last step. The environment delivered a consequence. Social learning theory has 2 main aspects: differential association and differential reinforcement. Differential association is when the individual's own attitudes or meanings are attached to a given behavior. For example, in Lenora's old job, she believed that she fit in because she knew the organization's culture. In her new job, she is unfamiliar with the organization's culture and is not well integrated or familiar with her work colleagues or her work environment. In this case, she sees herself as someone who doesn't fit in. The second aspect, differential reinforcement, is the rewards or punishments that follow or are consequences of behavior. Lenora's behavior to this differential association is to put on a brave face. A consequence to this behavior is that she will be rewarded by seeming that she fits in. Punishment would be that she's exhausted all the time from this. Social identity theory falls under a social psychological construct called a social identity approach, which also includes self-categorization theory. Ashforth and Mail argue that the self-concept is comprised of a personal identity and a social identity. Identity answers 2 questions for people: who am I and how should I act? Unlike a personal identity, a social identity is one shared by all members of the social group and distinguishes them from other groups. Self-categorization theory explains that individuals form their social identity by categorizing themselves into certain groups. There are 2 parts to a person's social identity: cognition, their sense of oneness with the group, and affect, how much value they place on the group. Your group becomes the in-group and every other group is considered an out-group. In order to fully establish your group's collective social identity, you need to compare yourselves to the out-groups. This then helps to answer 2 more identity-related questions: who are we, and how good are we? Social identity can also answer the how should I act question through group norms. The stronger someone's social identity is, the more likely they are to internalize group norms and characteristics, which then drives their behavior. Social identity is strengthened when the individual has a strong link to the organization. Their values are aligned with the organization's and when they share characteristics with others in the in-group. Social identity can also have other impacts besides influencing behavior, including on self-esteem, satisfaction, and effectiveness at work. It can also lead to loyalty, pride in the group, cohesion, and more effortful activity towards organizational goals. Let's now take a look at how Lenora's social identity impacted her. Being a new employee, Lenora's link to the organization is relatively weak. When self-categorizing, people's perceptions of their relative power within the group can influence how they relate to the other group members. Lenora has very little power compared to her co-workers as she has just entered the organization. As a result, Lenora has not been able to develop a strong social identity with the company. This explains why she has not been able to properly engage in social learning. As Lenora's social identity is not fully developed, she relies on her personal identity to answer the "how should I act" question. This means she needs to put more work into interacting and working with her team, increasing her emotional labor burden. When delving into social identity, it is important to consider aspects of emotional labor and the impact it has on socialization. Emotional labor is a display of specific emotions by service employees that are expected during service encounters. There are two specific types of emotional labor. Surface acting is a display of emotions that are not actually felt by the individual. This can be done through both verbal and non-verbal cues. Deep acting occurs when a person actually tries to feel the emotions they are displaying rather than simply displaying as with surface acting. Genuine emotions, as the term states, are when a service employee actually feels an emotion without having to undergo deep or surface acting. Undergoing this emotion regulation can have negative impacts on employees. It has been found that conforming to display rules has increased employee stress and has had a decrease in job satisfaction. Linking this back to Lenora's case, when she was working with her new co-workers, she felt self-conscious but wanted to make a good impression. Due to this, Lenora is feeling stressed out and upset. However, she is aware that does not fit with the display rules of the organization. This is a prime example of her surface acting, as she is displaying emotions that she does not actually feel, as it is expected for her job role. Lenora felt really aware and conscious of the fact that she didn't fit in. Despite this, she put on a brave face and looked fine on the surface. However, this resulted in constant stress and exhaustion. Now let's move on to script theory. Script theory is relevant to Lenora as she continues to develop experiences with the organization. Script theory is key when analyzing why certain social or non-social interaction outcomes may occur, more specifically, why people react the way they do. There are some core aspects to this theory, the primary ones being that they are both social and non-social scripts. While the other aspect would be that within each of those, there are a subset of both a positive and negative effect. For a social interaction, the positive effect is joy, while the negative is fear. But for a non-social interaction, the positive effect is excitement and the negative effect is fear. But what is a script? The underlying metaphor to Tompkins' theory is that the individual is a screenwriter. As a writer, they encounter scenes which include all the basics of your typical story and objects such as other people, locations, or what time it is, just to name a few. As people gain more experience with certain familiar scenes, a script begins to form. Scripts are defined as what the individual writes to contend with the situations of each scene. In a person's life, there are typically two types of scripts. The first kind are habitual scripts that cover day-to-day activities required to fit in social cliques, such as saying hello. The other are nuclear scripts. This subset covers urgent and unresolved scenes that require attention, which, for example, might be when a customer yells at an employee for the first time. The nuclear script is how the person reacts to this unexpected scene. It's important to note that scene experience is needed to form scripts. Initially, there will not be many formed scripts, so in new situations, people's actions will often be a reaction to the scenes they are forced into. However, as more experience is gained in similar scenes, scripts are formed, which from then will dictate people's responses in those situations. Scripts are the roles individuals put in place for certain situations, and just like in a movie, these roles are what the individual would be playing. Often, this will require some sort of acting, whether it will be surface or deep level acting, to be able to reflect what the script requires. Lenora is currently using scripts that she would have used previously in her day-to-day life. Her habitual script for her learning and work life has been one of strict guidance and control. This script has obviously been fostered by her admittedly controlling parents at home, as well as her old workplace, further demonstrating the impact of similar experience in the formation of script. However, in her new role, she has had a new scene to contend with. With Allison not providing the guiding mentor role for Lenora's usual script, he has turned this new scene into a nuclear one. Due to the nuclear nature of the script, it requires immediate action from Lenora in order for her to be able to start fitting in with the social norms. Therefore, she might need to form a new script from some of her experience at the new department, as well as perhaps some imagined scenes in order to better align herself with her colleagues, to avoid the negative social effect of shame. As her co-workers are expecting a bit more interaction or assistance from her, she may have to socialize more. Whether or not she was taught about this during her initial socialization into the business is besides question. She now has to modify her work script to fit the organization. She might be required to provide some surface or deep level acting to better conform to the team's norms. Let's recap what we now know about Lenora. Social learning theory. She could not adapt to her environment on the first day because there was so much to observe, limited experience at the moment. Social identity theory. She felt inferior to her colleagues and therefore was hesitant to portray her true identity. Emotional labor. Being unable to adapt to the environment, she has led her to be physically present at work without being emotionally present as she lacks identity. Script theory. Holds on to previous scripts gained throughout her life and finds it difficult to react to new, unexpected situations. Let's take a look at the possible solutions. Organizational socialization refers to a process through which an individual gains social knowledge and skills to assume an organizational role. This is the very first step that Lenora needs to fit in. In the context of human resource development, it is a theory of internally enculturating new employees by engaging them in socialization practices. These practices develop their understanding of the organizational roles, role expectations, and group norms. The reasoning behind organizational socialization practices surrounds the concern that new employees carry the possibility of disrupting the beliefs and customs of an organization as they are not yet fully conditioned to the organization's culture. As we have observed, Lenora is struggling to fit in with her new workplace and tends to keep her distance from others. Had the organization adopted socialization practices, her first day at work would have been more socially welcoming. There are 3 stages to socialization. The first aspect is anticipatory socialization, which refers to one's initial idea of the organization prior to exposure, also known as the pre-arrival stage. Lenora would have made her own assumptions of the workplace culture through the corporate image, word of mouth, and relative media surrounding the organization. The second stage is the encounter. This is experience on entry into the organization and the differences between the assumptions about the job, colleagues, the boss, and the culture in general are realized. If expectations meet the reality, the encounter stage cements earlier perceptions. However, it is not always the case. When the reality does not align to the assumptions, new employees may be likely to resign. It is also important to encourage friendship ties at this stage, as it enhances the new employee's commitment when colleagues and friends help them learn the ropes. At this stage, Lenora develops a true impression of the workplace culture by exposing herself to the organization on her first day of work. She noticed that her supervisor wasn't as involved as she had thought, and her colleagues worked independently despite being a team. The third aspect is one's change and acquisition, also known as the metamorphosis stage. This stage determines whether or not the employee has adjusted to their job by accepting the norms and values of the group, mastering their job task, and resolving any conflicts. Employees who successfully complete this stage are socialized as they are likely to be satisfied, internally motivated, perform their jobs dependently, and committed to the organization. Based on Lenora's case, we understand that she has struggled with her change and acquisition as she finds it difficult to develop her social identity. There are complaints that she does not proactively assist her colleagues. This can be explained by her lack of commitment to the organization as she is not internally motivated to help others. In summary, Lenora has not been broken into the organization. Could this have been prevented? Yes. In an attempt to break in new employees to the organizations, socialization and orientation programs are introduced. Newcomers need clear information on expectations, roles, norms, and values, as well as any relative experience to perform their job effectively. Organizations can adopt 2 practical approaches to increase the effectiveness and satisfaction of new employees breaking in. The first approach is through a realistic job preview. This involves using complete information about a job and the organization when recruiting staff. The information set out in the job description must accurately describe both the positive and negative aspects of the advertised role. By doing so, it reduces the likelihood of new employees being overwhelmed as their expectations are in line with the actual requirements of the job. However, this approach will not be effective if the new employee has already experienced the encounter stage. If that is the case, the second approach is designed to introduce new employees to the organisation. These are employee orientation programs and are typically practiced the first day of work. Objectives are to reduce newcomers' stress and anxiety, startup costs, turnover, break-in time, and to assist their learning of organisational culture. It also aids the process of adjusting to work groups and encourages the development of positive attitudes. Employee orientation programs can be done in a number of ways, such as inductions, workplace tours, providing an employee handbook, facilitating training and shadowing, assigning mentors, social lunches, and by setting an evaluation period. An employee orientation program would be best suited to Lenora as she has already commenced working at the organisation. She could really benefit from training and having a mentor shadow her to assist and field any questions that she may have. Having a mentor will also foster a professional relationship to enhance her sense of belonging and in turn develop her unique social identity at the organisation. Therefore, Lenora needs socialisation in order to properly break into the organisation and feel welcome. You should now be able to define and understand social learning theory, social identity theory, emotional labour and script theory, and understand how they tie together. Apply each theory to the lighting a fire case study. Understand the role of socialisation in the employee orientation process. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed our video. Stick around for the Kahoot!